In this video, we're going to be talking about the Indiana Parenting Time Guidelines and how they work in Indiana. They may be something you've heard of in your divorce or custody case, and you just may not be sure what you need to know about them and what the important provisions are. So we're going to talk about that. And before we do that, about me, my name's Nathan Vining. I'm a family law attorney here in Indiana, and I represent people throughout the state and would be happy to talk to you about questions you have about the Parenting Time Guidelines. So the guidelines are a framework that the Indiana courts use that set out a lot of times the minimum parenting time that a parent should have, as well as key provisions like how do you alternate things like the holidays, how does communication work, what do you do if there's conflicts in parenting time or changes needed to be made to parenting time schedules. And you can find them here if you just, it's a quick Google, but essentially it's on the indiana.gov website, and it's a pretty long document that sets out all of these different parameters. And they basically, the goal is to create visitation schedules for split families that provide meaningful contact for each parent. And some of the guiding principles are that they want to see each parent have frequent contact. They want the contact to be meaningful. They want the schedule to be agreed on by the parents. And they also want to see something that's set out in the best interest of the child that maintains the relationship of both parents. So there's things like having phone calls with your child weekly without interference. There's an opportunity for additional parenting time where if you need to have care for your child for some point where you're away, you should offer the other parent the chance to provide that care first, and things like that. So ultimately the goal of the guidelines is basically to have just frequent, meaningful contact between both parents and the children. So the guidelines cover a lot of things. I would recommend that you go through and read through them. We're going to talk about some of the most important ones. And first is the guidelines require that both parties keep the other parent apprised of their personal contact information. This is something that can go wrong in a lot of cases where if a parent gets frustrated, they may block or limit the communication with the other party. And that is a big thing that you see rules to show cause or contempt motions filed over where you're trying to reach out to the other parent, you can't get a hold of them. Another big thing with communication, this isn't the guidelines, but you also oftentimes can see parenting time maps used, which are, I highly recommend. Essentially, it means that you communicate through an application instead of text or phone. And one of the benefits is that it allows you to separate yourself from the other parent and check the messages once, twice a day, and they're not messaging you at work, at appointments, or during your personal time. So it's more, you can find the space where you can be ready to interact with that person and contact them through that. Another thing that's important is a parent and child are entitled to have private communications without interference from the other parent. Also, they talk a lot about transportation, and typically the parent will pick up the child at the beginning of parenting time, and then where the child goes back to, that parent will pick them up at the end. That kind of helps because the parent taking the child back goes to the house and actually picks up the child, so you're not waiting on somebody that may be late. You actually just go there and get the child when the parenting time is over. Another big thing is that the opportunity for additional parenting time, which we discussed before. They talk about the need to adjust schedules in there, and a lot of times it sets out the plan for what should happen if parenting time is changed. And typically, if parenting time needs to be changed, they recommend notifying of the change as far as in advance, but then finding a mutually agreeable adjusted parenting time sometime within a month of that canceled parenting time. And then they also talk about how to handle disputes as well as caring for the child through third parties. So there's a lot there, and it also sets out specific parenting time provisions, which is what we're going to talk about next. But before we do that, it's important also to know, and this is a big thing, both parents in Indiana have a right to access to the child's school records. A lot of times I work with a non-custodial parent who may not know exactly what's going on with school, and I always recommend that somebody reach out to the school and form those relationships directly. A lot of schools will have an app that you can sign up to where you can see grades, events, assignments, communicate with the teacher, and both parents have the right to do that. So I always recommend the non-custodial parent especially get involved in the school activities and see what you can do to know the teachers, know what apps you should be using, how you can encourage your child's school relationship. Going into parenting provisions, the guidelines set forth a lot of different things. And essentially, this is what you would think of as the bare bones minimum schedule, unless there's some reason to restrict parenting time further, which of course would have to specifically find. But a lot of times when there's a young child, which is what we're talking about now, early infancy, it's a lot of shorter contact and more days per week. So like a child birth through 4 months, you're looking at 3 non-consecutive days for 2 hours. And then when the child gets a little older, it's 3 days for 3 hours. And then it also provides for holiday parenting time. And then it can include overnights from 5 to 9 months. And these are just essentially minimums. Parties are free to agree to more. And parties are also free to argue for less, depending on what facts are present in your case. Then when we go, it just continues every 3 months, expanding ultimately to having long days on Saturdays and Sundays from 19 to 36 months. And then when the child reaches 3 years of age, that's where you would see the typical schedule, which is typically alternating weekends and 1 evening per week. And ultimately, that evening per week can be an overnight. It just depends on what's present in your situation. You guys may agree that it's an overnight, or you may have to go to court and argue that it should be an overnight based on your relationship with the child and your ability to care for the child. So again, 3 years and older, it's that alternating weekends. And then it also goes into extended parenting time, and that's different depending on the child's age. And a big thing is that the extended parenting time is based on the school calendar. So before the child's in school, you get 4 non-consecutive weeks a year. Once the child's in school, you would get extended parenting time over school breaks, as well as half the summer. And it's important to note that the non-custodial parent gets to choose how that parenting time occurs, and they have to notify the other parent by April 1st each year. And what they would do is either do alternating weeks or split the summer into 2 segments. The other big thing that the guidelines cover is holiday parenting time. I always recommend that people review this, and most of my clients would follow the holiday parenting time schedule as set out, where essentially you would have your special days, Mother's, Father's Day, your birthday, the child's birthday alternates, Christmas vacation alternates, where essentially the day is split. But parties are free to agree to do things specifically that may fit their situation better than the guidelines set out. And sometimes what I may put in an order or request even is that parenting time for holidays be set out as agreed by the parties, and in the event they don't agree, they would follow the schedule and the guidelines. So you have a default way to go if you guys can't work things out. But a lot of times, for instance, one parent may have Thanksgiving as a very special holiday with their family, and they want to do their Thanksgiving every year, and the parties agree to do something specifically different for their case. And that kind of stuff's very common, but this is a good default schedule, and I recommend reviewing it and seeing how it could fit to your situation. So ultimately, if you are dealing with a divorce or custody case and you're dealing with issues with the guidelines, and it can be a lot of issues. For instance, you may have issues with getting the phone answered, and you're not able to talk to your child through the week while they're with the other parent or during the other parent's parenting time. An attorney can help with things like that. They can help with transportation issues. Ultimately, when I get involved in a case, doesn't have a framework. And what these guidelines do is provide a framework. So it's, how does transportation work? How does phone time work? How do holidays work? What's the schedule? And the goal is to create a schedule so there's less conflict and it's better for the child. And ultimately, we can help resolve those disputes. And sometimes it just takes working through things a little to figure out what works in your situation. So for instance, you may not have a set time for a phone call every day, and that just works. You guys are able to work it out and it works fine. But sometimes you may not be getting through, and you need to go to court and have a specific time set where every day at 7, you're able to have that phone call and talk to your child. Or things like transportation as well. Maybe you guys do things different than the guidelines set out, but also maybe one parent is demanding that the other parent provide all the transportation. And with gas these days, it's proving to be too costly, and you need to go to court to help change that and take some of that burden off of them. So ultimately, if you need help, a lawyer can help resolve the issues, and I'd be happy to talk. Here's my number. Feel free to call or text, and I can review a situation with you and answer any questions you have about the guidelines.